Welcome into Hand Raised Guys, presented by Comer Heating and Air, Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. On tonight's show, Chase Parham is joined by former Ole Miss walk-on football player John Williamson. Williamson is the bowling coach at Vanderbilt. He joins us after recently winning his third national title. Chase and John talk college bowling, the science of bowling, how it's unlike amateurs out on Friday nights at the lanes, and how Williamson went from Tim Corbin's baseball staff at Vanderbilt to one of the country's best bowling coaches. First, I want to tell you about Comer Heating and Air and Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. Different names, same great products, same great people, same great services. If you live in Oxford, Batesville, Tupelo, or the surrounding area, get in touch with Comer, 662-801-1777. If you live in Hernando, Memphis, Olive Branch, that area, get in touch with the people at Southern, 662-429-4429. It's early May. You know what's coming. The heat is coming. Make sure that AC is ready to roll and ready to operate in the deep South summer that isn't that far away. This will be the Friday Oxford Exxon podcast, the Oxford Exxon located Highway 6 West in Oxford. You can try to win box tickets to the series finale on May 13th against Auburn. Simply tweet at Oxford Exxon. Use the hashtag RebelReady. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. Clark Ford is in Amory, Mississippi. 662-257-1900 is the number. Call it. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. It's right to the bottom line. There's no hassle. There's no haggle. You just get your quote. And what you do with it is up to you. You can shop it around, of course, or you can do what I've done about 5 times now, or what I recommend that you do. And that is hop into a Clark Ford. You will love the product. You'll love the service. Corey and the people at Clark Ford, they want to be your car guy. They want to be your truck guy. They'll prove to you what that means when you make the call. 662-257-1900. John Williamson, other guests join on the MyPerfectFranchise.net hotline. Are you a displaced corporate executive? Are you wanting to put your career in your own hands? Are you an experienced entrepreneur wanting to diversify? If any of that applies to you, Andy Ludicky can help. He is a guy who owns multiple franchises and businesses. He uses his expertise to help others find their American dream through a very thorough and free consultation process. So call Andy, put your life and your career in your own hands. It's 100% free. You have nothing to lose. Find your perfect franchise at myperfectfranchise.net or contact Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. You can also call him at 404-973-9901. Here is Chase Parham and John Williamson on the MyPerfectFranchise.net hotline.
John Williamson now joining us on the My Perfect Franchise hotline. John, appreciate the time today. Want to go into a little bit of bowling, a little bit of background. Ole Miss grad. You've been with Vanderbilt bowling for I guess almost 20 years now. At this point, I'll tell you. You hooked me the other night. Like, we've got a mutual friend. I knew you guys were playing in the national championship, and I'm a horrifically bad bowler. You would laugh at me. It's pathetic on all ways. But I'll tell you, I turned on it, and I don't know that I would have said this. It's not at all a bad TV product. You can actually get into that a little bit as the games are going on, and it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's a lot of people that at first glance or first thought would say, yeah, no, I'm not that interested in it. But there's an element of anxiety that comes with it that you can't replicate. It's like having a free throw contest to win the basketball national championship. Essentially what it is.
It's interesting too, because while most people are really bad at it, most people have tried it. So they understand to some level, they know just enough with the sport to be dangerous and go, hey, I've bowled a strike. I've done this. There is an element where in a lot of sports, we can't relate to that whatsoever. That doesn't necessarily exist with bowling.
No, I mean, in some ways it's like a blessing and a curse, because you'll get people to tell you that, oh, I shot 200, so I'd beat like everybody on your team or whatever. And it in that regards, it's kind of frustrating, but it allows people to get sort of hooked into it because they know enough that they can follow along, where, some of the other sports like lacrosse that have these complex rules that if you're not in the lacrosse world, you don't have any idea like what the crease is and, what you're like, I know they're trying to get the ball in the net, but I don't know that. And so with bowling, there's enough people that have bowled that know the idea of it. They get the idea of scoring, how it works. strikes are better than spares, and you don't want to open. And so you don't, so you can have a casual fan get into it without actually like having to know sort of the intricacies of it.
Yeah, what got me was I'm not familiar enough with it to understand just how far ahead or behind you were as it was going on
Yeah.
with the strikes, the double strikes in a row. Where I go, okay, I remember this from kind of back in the day, but I can't quite tell you exactly where you're at. The announcers did a pretty good job, though. I'll say the TV product was enough to keep you pretty zoned in there at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the announcers do a great job. It is a for all parents at home. You watch bowling on TV. It's a great way to hone your math skills, so you can get your kids to learn to multiply and add by 10 and 20, and that kinds of stuff. So you can practice your basic arithmetic.
So you just won your third national title. You've been doing this for a pretty good while. Tell me, and I know a little bit. I've done a little bit of background here, but how'd you get into this? I mean, what happened? How do you get to bowling? Because I would assume that was not where your plans were when you left Ole Miss.
Is not. I had I guess crashed and burned as a football player, thinking that I was going to become like the next great like football coach. And then I got into working at Vanderbilt in the athletic department because I didn't really know how to get into being a football coach. But my dad worked in the athletic department at Vanderbilt, and there was a guy who worked in the fundraising office at Vanderbilt, and his name was Chris Wyrick. He sort of felt pity on me, I guess, because he sort of saw this lost soul who just graduated, didn't know what to do. So he offered me an internship, and I took an internship with the National Commodore Club in August of 2002. And I think in right around July, August of 2002, Tim Corbin was hired as the baseball coach at Vanderbilt. I went to his press conference. He's a very charismatic guy. He's engaging. He brings you in. He makes you feel important. And so I listened to this press conference, and I was just a recent college grad. I was, not married, didn't have kids. So I walk up to him and I just say, "Hey, coach, I know that you're busy, but if you ever need help, let me know. I'd be glad to help." I didn't know what he was going to do. I didn't know, if he'd ever take me up on it. That'd be the last time I ever talked to him. And so then like a week later, he's like, I need these letters mailed. And I was like, I can take them to the post office. He goes, no. I need them stuffed. So I was like, he's like, do you think you can do that? And I was like, sure. And so then he brings me like 800 letters that needed to go out to like every high school in Tennessee, every high school in like Alabama. I mean, I don't know who all it went to. So I spent an entire weekend just folding and stuffing these envelopes. And I brought him back on Monday, and I said, "Here you go." And he was like, I guess impressed that I did 800 letters or whatever. I mean, I had paper cuts for days doing that. And then he hired me as his ops person in December of 2002. I worked with him for 2 years, sort of learning the ins and outs of NCAA stuff, learning the ins and outs of recruiting. Vanderbilt baseball starts taking off. We go play the Super Regional in Texas in 2004 and get beat. At that point, I'm trying to get out of the grind of college baseball. College baseball it is hard. I mean, you go from January to June nonstop, no days off. It's just constant. And so I was like, burnout. I want to do something different. And in the spring of 2004, they have a announcement at Vanderbilt that they're starting a bowling team. I did not know that because I was in the grind of baseball. And like all sort of new sports and Olympic sports, they didn't pay the coach very well. And so I go out bowling with some department people right before I'm getting ready to leave. I was looking at taking a job in fundraising at the University of New Mexico. And I was like, going to go out for an interview. That's what I was going to do. I was going to be a fundraiser. So I go bowling, and I'm a pretty good recreational bowler. I'm not a very good bowler, but most people would say, "Wow, you're pretty good." And so they go back and tell the guy that's leading the search that I'm this really good bowler. He comes and finds me, and he's like, "Are you a really good bowler? I hear you're a really good bowler." And I was like, "I am." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he's like, "Well, have you thought about being our bowling coach?" And I said, "No, I've not." And he's like, well, you should think about it. And he was hoping, because they couldn't find a coach. They'd interviewed all these people, couldn't find one. And he was hoping that he could, like, I guess, end the search. It was by that point, it was sort of the end of August. School had started, and they wanted to start the team. So I thought that this would be the opportunity to be the head coach of a Division I program without having to sort of toil through the ranks of being an assistant, moving from place to place. My family's from Middle Tennessee. So I was like, I get the best of all the worlds. And the benefit was I get to be anonymous. I don't, no one's going to know who I am. No, like when you go and eat with, if you were Lane Kiffin or you're Mike Bianco or you're Tim Corbin and you go to a restaurant, you're going to have all kinds of people come and talk to you. And it is not something that if you're not used to or don't like, it's a very unnerving thing to do. And so you have lots of people offering opinions and that kinds of stuff. And so, like, for 2 years, we would go eat with Coach Corbin. He got out much more for lunch and stuff at that time, because he was not as famous as he is now. And so that's unnerving. And so I was like, I don't want to be this I don't want to be this Olympic sport or this revenue coach. I want to find something that's anonymous that I can do. And so I thought this is like the benefit. This is like the best of everything. So Coach Corbin helped me put together a packet. I gave it to Brian Reese, who was the director of the search. And it was basically just how I thought that I would learn bowling faster than someone would learn NCAA and recruiting. It was a new sport from the NCAA in 2004. So they had won championship. They interviewed a few more people. They came and they asked me if I wanted. I didn't even really interview for it. That's, I guess, how desperate they were to start the team. They just asked me if I wanted it, and I said sure. And so then 20 years later, here I am.
Yeah, I'm going to back up for a second, because I'm a college baseball nut. I'm just kind of curious. Vanderbilt at that point, they hire Corbin. Obviously, the program had been struggling. What was that like, just being a part of the build at that point? Because, I mean, Vanderbilt's been the best program in the country over the last decade, and everything that he is. Because, I mean, Vanderbilt gets, and I mean this in a positive way, Vanderbilt gets criticized sometimes for all the extra potential help and some of those things. But Tim put that together. I mean, he was able to kind of sell that vision. What was Corbin in that program like in 2002?
Well, in 2002, it was a shell of what it is now. I mean, we had very little in terms of like corporate sponsorship. We switched to DeMarini really quickly, and they gave us bats. And I remember the guys thought it was so cool that there was like a etched Vanderbilt on like the shaft of the bat, and I was like, and they're like, this is awesome. We had to like monitor like batting gloves, like we couldn't just give out pairs of bats. I'm sure now they could have one for every bat if they want. But like back then we were like, are you sure you needed new batting gloves? Like we just had to, I mean, everything was just a minuscule of where it was now. But you could see, they had the thing that Vanderbilt had always been able to do prior to Tim is they were always able to get like a couple really good players. And so they would always have a first round pick, a top 5 round pick, but they didn't have like the supporting cast. And so the thing that Tim was able to do is he kept Jeremy Sowers, who was a first round pick in 2004. And he was able to build some depth around him. And, they use the financial aid system, and, I mean, everyone talks about it being an advantage and things like that. But at the end of it, these kids are still paying a decent amount of money to come to school. And they also have to get into school. So like academic scholarships don't really exist here. You have to be crazy smart. In 20 years, I've never had one for a bowler. Has never gotten an academic scholarship. They're like, I mean, I say they're like Sasquatches or leprechauns, because I hear they exist, but I've never seen them, And so, but watching Tim, like the kids get the belief that that they're special, and Tim is a relentless worker, and he demands out of you what he puts in it. And so everybody sort of raised their level to what he was doing. And so like I had this like front row master class in building a program. I mean, Tim didn't start it from zero, but it wasn't very successful. And so, I watched him as he recruited David Price. I watched, how he went about doing that, how he went about convincing this guy to come to Vanderbilt. And so, you saw this for 2 years, and then, Ward Scott hit a home run to sweep Tennessee in 2003, and that put Vanderbilt in the college or in the SEC tournament for the first time in like 10 years. And so that sort of started a little bit of momentum. And then 2004 come and we were pretty good. Beat Virginia in a regional at UVA, and then we go to Texas and just get the doors blown off us by the Texas eventual national champion. But you for 2 years you just saw this guy do it, and when I played football, the coaches are so far removed in some ways from the players. Like, you don't have that sort of daily interactions and things like that. So that was the first time I've ever got to really see it. And so, when they gave me the job and they offered it, like, I really and truly felt like I could build this because I watched it. I watched it from its I didn't know where it was going to go with Tim and that kind of stuff. He had been, uh, I guess, wooed by lots of other like powerhouse schools. I had no idea if he would just leave or whatever, but he stayed, and I watched that happen, and I just knew that, like, I knew it could be done. You just have to do it the right way.
Did you needle him a little after you got your first title before he did there, 07 or so? You kind of poke him a little?
No, I mean, I know better than that. I have the utmost respect for him because I know how he works and what he invests into that team. And so, it was fun. It's funny because you look back and you're like, I'm going to be a barroom trivia question in like 50 years or something, or maybe I am now. But, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. So he's almost like a second father to me.
You said obviously you're a pretty good recreational bowler. How'd you get into it? I mean, have you bowled all your life? I mean, it's common, but it's not the most common thing in the world. How did it happen?
So when I was playing football in college, I had some friends that I guess were probably not at that time. They've turned into be like fine, upstanding citizens, but at that time they didn't necessarily have to have jobs and that kind of stuff. And there's a bowling alley in Nashville that had $5 all you can bowl on Wednesdays. And so, being sort of broke college kids, I would go work out at my high school, and I would meet them there, and we would bowl from like 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. and sort of wholesome competition where there's 4 or 5 guys that we would just basically spend one day a week just trying to win. And so just natural, I mean, we didn't have lessons. We just sort of taught ourselves, and we just sort of felt like that was the best way that we could spend our time without really getting into trouble. And so my dad would always hound me and say, you need to do something that's going to help you find a job. You need to, you need to be productive. You're just wasting time. And, he sort of ate his words, but, it took a little while to figure out the path that it would take me. But, those like 8 hours we would spend on Wednesdays at Melrose were some of the funnest times I had.
How'd your dad react when he found out you're going to be the bowling coach?
At first, he didn't believe it because he thought that they were either dumb for hiring me or I was dumb for taking it. I'm not sure which one. But he'd been in the athletic department for like 15 years at that point, and so he was just sort of like, well, if you're going to do it, you need to do it. And so, he's been nothing but supportive since. But at the very beginning, he was like, I don't think this is a good idea.
It's very common for a first year program, an early program, to struggle. I think I've read you guys went 12-69 or something in your first season. How do you recruit? How do you build a roster? What does recruiting look like in bowling?
The first team we ever had was students on campus. So I put an ad. I got hired after school started. And we needed to start in the fall. So I put an ad in the newspaper, and we had 10 young ladies show up, and that was our first team. We didn't have a tryout. We didn't have anything. We were just, I thought we were going to have all kinds of people show up, and we had 10. So that was our team. And so when we were recruiting that first year, I got lucky because the day I got hired, I got an email from a guy who was like, "You should check out this girl in New Jersey," and her name was Karen Greigel, who ended up being our first commitment, our first coach. She's the head coach at Monmouth right now, but she was like a New Jersey state champion, and she was a really academic oriented person. They're like, you should look at her. And luckily for us, bowling, I mean, it's still to this day, but it's not as fast recruiting as other sports. So, you know, if we were today and you were in volleyball, like Vanderbilt announced it's starting volleyball, but we're not starting until 2025 because the recruits are so far out in that sport. And so for us, we're still sort of year of. So like we're recruiting 2024s. And so there's a bunch of kids that weren't committed, affiliated with the institution at that time in September. So I just got on the internet and we started contacting people, and we started just basically telling them, don't worry about what's happening now. Like these are general students. They, like, I appreciate what they're doing, but like, they're not bowlers. They wouldn't classify themselves as bowlers. And so, so that was basically our message. And I signed 5 kids the first year, and I'd never seen one of them throw a ball in person. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, we saw video, I talked to people, but like with the speed at which it was happening and doing our own season, and then, and then being by myself, I didn't have an assistant at that time. Like, there's really no way for me to like go recruit and also do things that, it just didn't work. So looking back on it, I'm kind of like, that was pretty naive of me to think that like these 5 kids are going to work out. But they sort of laid the groundwork. They listened to sort of the idea and the message of what Vanderbilt could do, and they bought into it without any kind of like proof.
There's obviously a very competitive level prior to college. I mean, you mentioned when you and I were talking before we started the show about U.S. junior nationals or whatever's going on. What is the profile of a bowling recruit? Have they played nationally competitive for a while? I mean, how many are just, do you ever come across some that are just really, really good recreational? I mean, like, what is the profile or the pattern here?
So the way it's becoming now is that it's like an AAU kind of circuit. There's a Storm Youth Challenge. There's a bunch of national events that these kids go, and it's like once a month they sort of crisscross the United States going to. And so some of these kids that are coming out right now are extremely talented from a tournament base. They traveled the country. They understand that center to center is different. They understand that like region of the country, like those sort of environment issues can sort of change like how things play and that kinds of stuff. And so so they're so far more advanced now than they were 20 years ago. And that's just because of the like bowling is sort of light years catching up to some of these other sports in terms of outside tournaments. And so most of the kids have probably played they come in as they're 17, 18 years old. Most of them have been bowling for anywhere from 14 to, some of them started bowling when they were 3. So so they've been 14, 15 years of bowling. Their parents have done it typically, or grandparents have got them into it. Some people get into it by a birthday party, when they're younger, and then they just sort of start doing leagues, and then that sort of takes off from there. But, these kids are, I guess like all sports, you sort of think that like only the footballs and the basketballs and the baseballs have these like sort of national things, but you get into it, and it's not as large in terms of numbers, but they're just as serious as some of these other sports.
Is it mostly, I mean, obviously you're seeing scores, you mentioned video. I mean, is it just how good they are from a competitive level, or are you noticing things fundamentally that can improve them? I mean, how do you sort of evaluate a prospect?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of those things. You're looking at them like there's some kids that are fundamentally just better, and they have skill sets. So if you're looking at like a baseball pitcher, they have spin rates on their balls that like some of those things that you can't teach it. Like they just have it. And so there's some kids that can get revolutions on a bowling ball that you can't do that you can't teach. And so those kids are obviously like checks. And then you watch body language, and then you watch how they interact with people. So their coach, their dad, their mom, whoever's working with them. I personally like to see people when they struggle, so you can see how they're gonna react if it's not going well. And so you take all this stuff in, and then you try to get them on campus and sort of see how they fit. And for us, it's really all about fit more than it's about anything else. Like, will they fit into what we're trying to do? Will they fit into like sort of like, are they more interested in themselves? Are they more interested in Vanderbilt? That kind of stuff. And so so we have a pretty good success rate when it comes to recruiting. We're not 100% in terms of like, we can offer kids and they'll say no. It's not the easiest place to come to school, but there's a segment of the population that likes it. There's a segment of the population that wants, what we're offering. And now that now that we've had 3 national championships, it's one of those things that people can see that they can win national titles. They can go to school and for the most part, you're not going to become a professional. I mean, you can bowl professionally, but it's very hard to have that be your sole income. And so, we try to offer the idea that they can become a nurse, a teacher, or whatever, and the women's tours in the summer. So if they pick the right job, they can hit the 14 stops in the summer.
You won a national title pretty quickly inside 3 years or so. Once you got started, was it the recruiting class? Was it once the record improved? When did you realize, hey, there is a real viability here, that this is something that's going to work?
Well, it's interesting because she's my associate head coach now, but Josie Ernest at the time, Josie Barnes now, she was like the best player in the country. And she was 16 years old. She was competing at the U.S. Amateur Championship. I think she finished like 6th or 7th as a high school junior. And so I just sent her a letter. I was like, why not? That was the first year we had a team. So she was looking at the 12 and 69. She was looking at our team averaging like 175. And I kept just hounding with her that like things will be different, and then we get our first 5 recruits in on campus, and we go to the NCAA tournament in their freshman year. And so then she's starting to see that like that things will be different. And so then she decided to come. So she passed on all the sort of like the bowling schools that people would have traditionally thought that she would go to. And so she came. And so once I realized that we could compete with the Nebraskas, the Wichita States, the schools that have traditionally had power sort of bowling programs since the 1970s, that we could do that, then I knew that that sort of anything was possible. Then it was sort of like up to us to build a culture that could allow for success, but I knew that we could get the kids. And so basically Josie committing, I was around Halloween 2005. I knew that that was when. So it took basically a year.
What is your role during matches? I mean, what all are you trying to look at and do? I mean, obviously you've sort of set an order before this, but like what is sort of your in-match situation, and at what point? I mean, in some ways you're almost kind of playing psychologist as much as anything else,
Correct.
I would assume.
Correct. So Josie I would like, from a sports standpoint, I would say that Josie is more of like the offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. She's talking X's and O's. She's dealing that. Like I'm talking with Josie more about like, well, what is this what we need to do? Trying to like brainstorm things with her. When it comes to the girls, like we sort of have different ones that sort of, I'll say, react to us differently. And so there's certain ones that she sort of talks to. There's certain ones that I talk to. Generally, if someone needs to like get out of their own way, like I'm the one that generally has that conversation with them. But you're 100% right. I joke with people that at Ole Miss I took 15 hours of psychology, so I'm almost got a minor. But like I mean that 15 hours was the most valuable thing classes I took, because that's essentially all I do. is like my soul. I mean, 18 to 22-year-old girls, there's or women, there's a lot of things that can be going on. And so my job is to try to sort of corral their mind to be present where they are.
You were down 3-2 in the national final to Arkansas State at that point. I mean, are you do it? You know, are you trying to focus on, hey, what is the message right here? Are you letting them play as a team or a unit? Or are you just talking to them individually? How does that play out at that moment when you're one game away from losing?
Well, so we were actually down 3-1. And so
Oh,
when we were
3-1. Yeah, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we were down 3-1. I basically had I mean, because at that point it really doesn't matter. And so you're trying to instill some form of confidence into your group. And you know, ideally that's not the place that you want to be, is one game away from, I mean, as Milwaukee Bucks, you don't want to be one game away from elimination. But we had a huddle going into the start of game 5, and I was like, we have them right where we want them. And they like all looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I was like, they're going to try to defend something that they haven't won. So you're going to, like, if you come out and you're aggressive, you make quality shots, we'll win game 5. They'll start backpedaling. And in sports, once you start backpedaling, once you start playing defense, once you start trying to protect something, you're done. I mean, you look at prevent defenses in football, like the number of times that people go the length of the field because, you know, defensive backs are 20 yards off the field. Once you start in that mindset, over. And so, you know, we won game 5. We got, I'll say, lucky in game 6, but I knew that like they had this idea that they were up 3-1. They were going to, I mean, because it happened to us throughout the year. Like we would be up on people, and then we would start trying to protect something, and it's just impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible once someone starts thinking that they've already accomplished something, once they've already achieved something, to get them to like fight for it. They're trying to protect it. And like our girls were trying to fight for it, and they had nothing else to do but fight. And so, you know, we could have easily not have come through or whatever, but at the same time, like that was sort of what we've been practicing for all year, was to fight for 3 games to win a national title. And our kids sort of believed in, I guess they believed in the message or the idea, and they believed in each other, and that's really all you can ask for.
What does a practice look like? I mean, do you set up certain spares or scenarios? Do they work on certain things? I mean, what does that entail?
So our practices are done on like days and themes. And so Tuesdays is like, so Mondays are our required day off by the NCAA. Tuesdays is a spare day. So basically they shoot all we can set all kinds of combinations of spares. They do that for basically the whole practice. On Wednesdays, we tend to, we'll say work on first shots, strike shots. So we work on launch angles. We work on breakpoint control. We work on like speed control, those kinds of things. Thursday is sort of a hybrid of the two, depending on what we're doing better or worse at any given point in the year. On Fridays, you know, college students like to check out. So if we are at home practicing and not at a tournament, we do a competition called a list. So we have a segment of our group that we've found that is very task oriented. So they want to finish a task and start the next one. And then we have a segment of our team that is very competitive. And so what we found is that you can't just play games against each other like pickup and basketball or whatever, because half the group wants to win and that's like all they want, and the other half doesn't really care. And so what we figured out is if we do these lists, it accomplishes both tasks. So we put like these 3 girls against these 3 girls, and they have to complete it like 9 tasks. So you have the group that wants to win just because they want to win, and then you have the group that wants to check all the boxes. And so Friday is for us is a competition day, but it's not like we'll say like a true competition. And then for the most part, I want them to be college students. I had an amazing experience at Ole Miss. You know, like when Tuberville left and Coach Cutcliffe came in, I decided I was not cut out for football. So the last like couple years, I was just a regular student, and I enjoyed, you know, going on road trips to LSU for a football game. I enjoyed the Grove for football games. I enjoyed like being a student. And so part of the thing that, and like, I also realized that once you graduate, like it doesn't get funner. Like life doesn't get more fun than when you were in college. And so if we have recruits on weekends, we have tournaments on weekends. And so the weekends that we don't have any of that, I want them to be a college student. I want them to go to a football game. I want them to go, like if Vanderbilt plays at Ole Miss, I would love for them to go, on a road trip down, because I mean, you only get one chance of being 18 to 22, and you might as well live it up.
You did 2 years of walk on of football. I mean, there is amount of perseverance on just. I think I saw your quote one time. You said you practiced football more than you played football. That's about as astute as you can get for a walk on, because you're kind of giving your body to a cause as much of anything at that point.
Well, and so my first year of school, I went to Tennessee Tech. I felt like I was a really good football player out of high school, and I'm not the largest individual, and so I didn't get a lot of like big time looks. So I went to Tennessee Tech. I thought I had a really good summer camp going into my freshman year, and they redshirted me. And once they redshirted me, I was pretty much like, I'm done with this place. Like I should be better than this. Ole Miss was in the sort of the teeth of the probation in the 90s. And so I was talking with Coach Knox and some of the other people. And they were convincing me that they needed me. And I was like, this is awesome. It's a Division I school. It's SEC football, and they need me. But I mean, not that they weren't honest with me, but they needed me to practice. Like, you had John Avery, you had Deuce McAllister, you had you had a lot, you had a lot of really good talent, like around. Like they didn't need me. And so, it's a very humbling experience, especially because that first year I went, I was ineligible. And so like when you're ineligible, like they don't I mean, I'm not gonna say they don't care if you get hurt, but they don't really care what they ask you to do, because like you can't play anyway. And so like we would do tackling drill, or I was do offensive drills with the linebackers, and we weren't allowed to lower our shoulder like when we would make contact, because that could hurt them.
Yes.
So we would just, we would just get absolutely just bulldozed by people. And, and I loved every minute of it. And, and then I had a pretty good first Grove Bowl, had a lot of catches in that. So I was pretty stoked going into the fall of 98. The fall of 98 didn't go like I thought it was going to. And then I talked with Coach Knox about becoming a student assistant, because I knew that was sort of where I was gonna be a coach. I wasn't going to the NFL. And then they left for Auburn. And so then I was sort of left with this idea of like, I don't know anybody in the new coaching staff, and I'm 21. I was at like a 3/4 inch plywood piece of wood I slept on because my back hurt. And so I just was just like, this is a good time. This is like a good, like clean break. And so, but yeah, practicing, the guys on the team are awesome. I mean, that was the thing I missed the most. And that's sort of the reason why, excuse me, I like being on like the bowling coach, is that there's a camaraderie with a team that you don't get in real life. Like not everybody's going the same direction. Not everybody has the same goals. Not everybody has the same desires. And when you're on a team, I remember we went to the Motor City Bowl and played Marshall or whatever. And like, that was, but everybody going up to that point had a sure, this is like, let's go bowling. And like, that was the goal of the team. And to be part of something like that, like you just can't buy. And so, that was when I got out and I'd worked in fundraising for a few months, and I got with Coach Corbin and I worked with him for 2 years. That's what the Vanderbilt baseball team was. It was a group of guys that was going for a single goal. And so like I hated the idea of leaving that, but it just wasn't the lifestyle for me. And so then bowling came out. And then once I got into it, I realized this is like ideal. I don't really have to recruit like these mammoth recruiting windows that I'm gone for all this time. For the most part, if school's not in session, my workload is very light. And so it doesn't really get any better. And so it just sort of all worked out.
In your kids, I mean, obviously they're competing as individuals, but as a team as well. I mean, it kind of gives there's a little bit of everything in that where, they're all somewhat doing the same thing. They don't necessarily have positions, but it's also a team sport at the same time. I'm going to ask you to geek out for a minute because it confused me. I was doing a little bowling research here, and I was reading, I guess maybe a story on you and the oil and the friction, and actually this changing. This is something that, as far as like what the actual lane is like, I don't know that I had any idea that made a ton of differences. In there was actual patterns to this thing. Can you break that down to me as a layman?
Yeah. So originally, like the lane oil that they put on the lane was used as a protectant.
Sure.
And so you think about like the friction that would be caused over and over again from wood lanes, you'd burn a hole in it over time. And so they put this thin layer of oil over the top of the lane. And then at some point, I'm not even sure when, they realized that like the shape of the oil will affect how you play or where you play. And so when they did that, then it started getting a game of moving left and right and things like that. And so when you think about a ball going down the lane, think about like your tire going through like the rain on the road. As your tire turns down the lane or down the road, it's picking water up and it's dropping it. It's picking water up and dropping it. And it's the same thing that a bowling ball is doing to the oil. And so as the ball goes down the lane, it manipulates the oil pattern. And as the more ball goes down, we'll say the drier it gets there because the oil's gone away. And so when a ball, like when you watch the TV show and the ball hooks, so when the ball's sliding, going straight, it's in the oil. And just like when you're in ice or snow or whatever, and your tires are spinning because it has no friction because it's on ice, as soon as it hits a dry spot, that's when it's going to jump. And so when you're watching the bowling ball go down the lane, it's sliding through the oil, and then once it hits a dry spot where the oil's not, that's when it checks up and goes towards the pocket. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to play the pattern left and right. It gives you the most amount of room to miss down lane, because unlike throwing strikes, like where you can just wear the outside corner out, like bowling isn't a sport where you're that accurate. Like you're trying to get accurate within like this much, like as a baseball pitcher, you're like, you're trying to just thread needles. And so bowling, we're trying to figure out what's the best part or what's the best place to get the most miss. And so that's why people change bowling balls. If you're watching it on TV, they go from this ball to that ball. I mean, think of that as like a 9-iron or an 8-iron or a 7 or whatever. So that it changes the length at which that ball goes down lane. And then they'll move left and right to try to find oil so it can get down lane.
Is there a benefit then to having left-handers as well as right-handers because they wouldn't be as manipulated on that side because it's hooking outside in?
Correct. Like left-handers are unique in that almost in every sport, they're like, if you have one, it's an advantage.
Yeah.
And so we had a lefty this year in our tournament. We had two lefties in 2018, but it's a blessing and a curse in bowling to be left-handed, because if you have like a very good look to the pocket, like it will always be there. But if you don't, there's not enough people to change it.
Oh, okay.
And so like you either have the world or you don't. And so for us, like, we always try to have a lefty or two, for instance, for the national title, in case the left side's right there and they're able to take advantage of it.
Do you how do lineups work? I mean, do you set them completely ahead of time by game, by match? Can you manipulate it inside games? What does it look like?
once the match starts, you're set with your like the order of your 5.
Okay.
Like I can take you out and put someone else in, but then you can't go back in. Sort of like soccer, you're
Okay.
done. But for us, like we set a lineup, we try to work on like the psychology of it. Like there's, for whatever reason, certain people do better following certain people, or certain people don't like to follow like other people and that kind of stuff. And so through the course of the year, we experiment with orders and rotations, and we try to figure out how you can maximize it. And so, but it's done for us, it's basically done on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes an hour to hour, depending on like what kind of a tournament we're in. But the from a mental standpoint, the young ladies can have it for a length of time, and then it can just go away. And so then we'll sub people in and out that way. But yeah, once you're set, once you're the one hole for the match, for the game, you're the one hole.
So the one that's like off sis now, or back in the day, Rebel Lanes or whatever, what's the oil pattern on just a recreational thing at night? I mean, is it going to be pretty light on oil period because it's not maintained in the same condition?
Yeah, it's gonna be a little lighter period. But so like think of it like golf. If your golf is, excuse me,
No,
if you're looking at golf, like how golf courses are set up to score. Regulate like the greens, the holes are in nice locations. They're not trying to make it the US Open on you, because they want you to come back. And so it's the same thing at we'll say entertainment centers and bowling centers. If you're going in, the oil pattern that they have is designed for you to score. So everything sort of feeds into the pocket. And so your score can increase. And so you have more fun, and nobody wants to, go and consistently shoot like 75. They want someone to pop off a 180 or a 175 or 200, so they come back.
So it would be harder for the recreational bowler on the places you guys play.
The oil patterns are not, yeah. So the oil patterns are not designed to score. So what would end up happening is that as a recreational player, you wouldn't strike as much, which would then force you to spare. And then most people aren't gonna, it's like chipping in golf. Like if you don't practice it, you're not gonna be good at it. So if you're not practicing spares, you're gonna have a lot of opens, and you'll probably shoot in the 100s to 120s.
Okay. And then, I guess though, what you're that's the benefit to those events. You talk about recruiting, where you go and watch all the best players. That their own lanes that are correct for what you're doing. It takes a lot of guesswork out versus just going down and watching the prodigy in nowhere, Iowa play on some.
Yeah. So the lanes that the oil patterns we bowl on are called are sport compliant. So they're sport compliant, and they're just right, and then there's just regular. And so yeah. So when the tournaments we go to are sport compliant, like when we're talking about moving left and right and things like that with your feet, like the moves are a little different on a house shot than they are necessarily on a sport pattern. So like, so the more experience you have with the sport patterns, the more familiar you are with moves and things like that, which would allow for more success in college. If you haven't bowled a lot of sport patterns, you can still have success in college, but it's going to be a little harder because your learning curve is going to be a little steeper.
Where's the sport nationally compared to when you started? More programs, more competitiveness. What have you sort of seen that transition?
Vanderbilt was the 42nd school that sponsored women's bowling. So it takes 40 to have an NCAA championship. They had an NCAA championship in April. So we were like the 42nd. So there's another school that added basically in 2004. And now there's, I believe, over 100. It's very popular. Nebraska is the only other Power 5 school that has it. It's very popular with we'll say like Conference USA, Sun Belt. Sort of in some ways it's like the smaller football program schools, because from a Title IX standpoint, we don't spend a ton of money. And so those schools are adding like the bigger roster sports. They're adding lacrosse, equestrian, crew, those type things that from a Title IX standpoint, they can spend a lot of money on. big rosters, bigger like coaching staffs, that kinds of stuff to sort of help balance it out. We don't. I mean, like if Vanderbilt, like when Vanderbilt, I think our operating budget was like $30 million or something in 2004, and so like if they were adding a sport now, like bowling wouldn't fit what they needed to do.
Mhm.
Because
That makes sense.
And like part of the reason that they ended up going with bowling is because they just wanted to add a sport for Sears, like I guess it was the Sears Cup at that time, the Capital One Cup now. But they looked at gymnastics, they looked at volleyball, they looked at softball, but because of our location, all of those would require facilities, and we don't really have the room. You know, we just built Hawkins Field. We didn't really have the room to build a softball stadium that's equivalent on campus to Hawkins Field. We didn't have the space to build another gym for volleyball or gymnastics. And so from a standpoint, it was like, well, we can add a sport, and like in some ways you can not spend a ton of money and have bowling, and you can potentially have success pretty quickly because you don't have as many teams to compete against. So that's sort of how it from my understanding, how it got picked up.
Where do you guys practice?
In 2014, they built an addition onto the student rec center. So they built an indoor football facility, and then they built 4 lanes on campus. So we now practice on campus.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah. So we were driving to Smyrna, Tennessee, which is about it's between Nashville and Murfreesboro.
Mhm.
And it was about 45 minutes one way. And so from 2005 to 2014, I drove to Smyrna every day for, seems like it seemed like an eternity. And so now I'm sort of spoiled by a 100-yard walk.
Well, a little less. You provided me a segue there. A little less travel for you, just day to day. I'd put an asterisk next to it because I adopted my daughter. You and your wife adopted 3 children, and then you went from had a biological one as well. Went from no kids to 4, and it looks like about a span of a year. That's a bit of a life change there.
Yeah. It was a dramatic life change. My wife and I got married in 2009. Ironically, in Las Vegas. I consider it to be my second favorite, or maybe my third favorite town. I like Nashville, I like Oxford, I like Vegas. But we were happy not having kids. She works in the corporate world. We both had jobs, we both had money. We thought we were, living large. And kids weren't really in the plans. And then we had a family situation, and we had 3 nephews that needed a home, and we didn't even really have a discussion about it because it sort of was like, I mean, I don't know if I could live with myself if I would rather like fly to the weekend to go to New York just because I want to go to New York, and then have the 3 of them split up. And so they got put in the state custody at North Carolina, or in the state of North Carolina. About 48 hours later, we petitioned to have them moved to Tennessee. So it took 6 months. So we had to go through foster training, the bureaucracy of Tennessee and North Carolina talking to each other for them to be transferred. They came actually, like, I took the Vanderbilt bowling team to Australia. They came back Father's Day 2016 to 3 boys, 10, 7, and 4. And I mean, it was talk about like your complete change in life, is that I left to go to Australia childless and like free to do whatever I want. I come back Sunday in June, Father's Day, have the 3 kids, and the next Saturday I'm signing them up for like youth soccer. So like you go there is no ramp up, there is no like, you go through the phases of walking and potty training, that kind of stuff. I was full bore into like youth soccer, like 2 weeks into like being a parent, and then that was, so we put the paperwork in January. In February, Melissa tells me she's pregnant. So Tucker was born in October. So we had 3 boys. We adopted and we got them in June, or we fostered them in June. We actually officially adopted them in July of 2017. So we got 4 boys, 2 working parents. Luckily, my parents live close. My sister and her crew lives close. She's got 3 kids that are around the same age, so they've been extremely helpful. My mother-in-law has been really helpful. Having two working parents that travel, it's not the easiest, but we try to make it work, and hopefully we're giving them a more stable existence than they would have had.
I've got 2 close friends that each adopted multiple kids after they were older in similar situations. Did you have what was the relationship like with them prior to the foster care? I mean, did they know you guys? I mean, how close was that relationship?
The oldest one knew us pretty well. He would come for basketball camps and that kinds of stuff. The 7-year-old knew of us. Like we would see him once or twice a year, that kind of stuff. He was still too young to really like sort of come on his own. And so he wasn't a stranger, but the 4-year-old, like we'd seen, but he didn't know we didn't really know who we were. And so, that was I guess it's just a unique time, because the 4-year-old sort of doesn't have any experience of his biological parents. The 7-year-old his only experience as biological parents is sort of the negative trauma and stuff that he experienced. And then the 10-year-old saw the good and the bad. And then, so he sort of saw it both ways. And so you're navigating the waters of 3 completely different experiences with their biological parents. How do you how do you talk about it? How do you because what we don't want is we don't want negative thoughts on their parents, right? Like you can't say negative things. You can't like people make poor choices all the time, and that doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them, we'll say, poor decision makers. And so for us, it's like we're doing the best we can to navigate them from now to 18, and then when they're 18, they can figure out sort of what takes for like what steps they want to take. But like we're trying to arm them with information and knowledge that will allow them to make the best choices when they're 18. But it was interesting, because when we had Tucker, the first time it's when I first realized that the 10-year-old was smart enough that he couldn't call me Uncle John anymore. And so, because he thought that would be too confusing to Tucker. Mm-hmm. So then he starts calling me Dad.
Wow.
And so I mean, to this day, we don't really have those discussions, because I don't really think there'd be I don't think it'd be an honest, like, I don't think he'd be like, oh, I don't, or whatever. But like, I don't really know what he views me as. Does he view me as his uncle? Does he view me as a parent? Does he view me as, am I simply just like someone that annoys him by telling him to do his homework? It's like what my role is. But like it's just interesting, because he was thoughtful enough to be like, I can't call him Uncle John, because that's going to confuse the new one. And so so he just started calling me Dad. And so I mean, and like it's weird, because the first time he called it to me, like I sort of was like, what'd you say? And it took a little bit of time to realize why he was doing it. But like it wasn't a coincidence that it happened after Tucker was born.
Wow. That's really cool.
So
in a lot of ways, did you? I mean, with there being 3 and obviously different ages, but would assume, I mean, it almost probably made them closer too. They're all transitioning into this together in a lot of ways, versus not having that support system that they're so used to, at least being siblings, I would assume.
Right. I mean, it's interesting, because I think in some ways they are very close. I think in other ways, like a lot of their upbringing has sort of taught them the idea that, like, so there's a lot of like, I don't know, manipulation at play. So they're always trying to get someone in trouble so they can get something. And so, and that thing can always vary. It can vary from like, um, he's in trouble, so I get to play by myself, or he's in trouble, so he doesn't get dessert, I get it all, or that kinds of stuff. So it's trying to navigate some of that stuff. I mean, there are certain things that they're thick as thieves on, that you're not separating them from anything. And then there's other things that to me they're extremely cutthroat.
Mhm.
And and so like if it's opportunity or if it's food, like I mean they'll turn on you on a dime. But but other things, whatever, they're pretty much like the Three Musketeers.
Like bowling at all?
No. They they'll come to work with me, and like in the summer, and they'll bowl for maybe 20 minutes. And then that's where the novelty runs off. My oldest plays football. He's a junior in high school. He plays football, he wrestles. My the middle one is into arts and drama and singing chorus. And then
Oh,
the
cool.
10-year-old he's into he'll do anything with a ball. So
Okay.
you just name it and he'll do it.
You were in town, you were in Oxford recently. How often do you get down?
Ironically, like, so my oldest is interested in Ole Miss as a school, so we came down and we watched it was a game before Kentucky last year. I don't even remember who it was. But that was the first time, amazingly, I took my wife to Oxford.
Oh,
And so I was like, I was always kind of hesitant because you bring your wife to your college town and you're like, I don't know who I'm going to run into, and what stories they're going to tell, and I'm always kind of hesitant on that. But she absolutely loved it.
cool.
She was like, I think I want to retire here, and I was like, we're mid-40s, like let's start talking about this. And so so we went down and this past weekend, and we watched the LSU game on Friday night, the baseball. And luckily, I guess we went to Morgan Wallen on Saturday.
Yes.
And I mean, we shopped on the square. We did all the I guess things that tourists do. Um, but it's absolutely amazing how different it is.
Right.
Like I came back, I guess, in baseball 2004. And I came back one other time without my wife. But like it's amazing how different Oxford is than when I was like I felt like I needed to have my GPS on to make sure I could get around. And like I was like, I kind of think I lived up this street. No, that's not no. And so but it's interesting, like we're gonna buy season tickets in football so we can
Okay.
come a couple of times this fall. I'm really trying to steer my kids there. And so, like, I mean, I'm trying to manipulate them.
Okay.
I mean, more so because I just don't want them going to Tennessee. Like, I mean, I just
Okay.
don't.
Gotcha.
I don't want that to happen. But like, so like, we're really trying with our 10-year-old and with Gabe and Tucker to get them like into the Ole Miss like pipeline. Landon, there's a chance that he'll end up there, I guess, the fall of 24. I'm not sure what Eli's thinking about, but yeah, so like we're I guess we're enjoying it. Or we still have some friends that live in the area down there, and there's some people that we went to school with that come back frequently. So, it'll be it's sort of nice, sort of reconnecting.
Absolutely. No, that makes tons of sense. What's the next month or so? Is there a recruiting window that you're doing? What's going on? You got a little
Nothing.
time off?
Nothing. They're going to recognize us at the baseball game on Saturday for winning the national title. The kids basically are gone on Sunday, and then I'm going to try to like recoup some of the hours I've lost this spring, and sort of enjoy the last little bit of summer, and then June hits, and then we start doing some recruiting stuff.
Excellent. Well, congratulations on the recent success, the 3 titles. Really appreciate the time, and let's talk again.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Again, our thanks to John Williamson, the Vanderbilt bowling coach, for his time today on Hand Raise Guys. This will be up in podcast form as the Friday Oxford Exxon podcast. Speaking of, we'll be back with you on Monday with at least for me, a short week of podcast, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then I'll be off for the rest of next week. We'll be back on Monday with another edition of the Oxford Exxon podcast. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we will talk to you on Monday.